In the shadow of forgotten walls, where echoes of madness linger like unspoken confessions, a documentarian arrives, not to heal the past, but to capture its ghosts on film. Mara Voss, ever the observer, steps toward the veil of fog-shrouded ruins. Her lens a shield against the pull of unseen eyes, watching from within. As she crests the hill, Mara Voss crested the hill in the late afternoon, her camera rig slung over one shoulder, like a reluctant companion. The asylum loomed ahead, not as a monolith, but as a dissolving shape, swallowed by the autumn fog that clung to the slopes like a shroud unwilling to lift. She paused at the rusted gate, its hinges groaning faintly under the weight of neglect, and adjusted her lens. This was procedure. Frame the approach, note the isolation, log the atmospheric pressure, 23.4 degrees Celsius, humidity thick enough to taste. Detached, professional. The fog rolled in thicker now, tendrils curling around the crumbling facade of the main building, where windows gaped like empty sockets. Mara narrated softly into her recorder, her voice a measured anchor in the hush. Hilltop Asylum, established 1927, closed 1973 amid whispers of unethical trials. Local lore speaks of echoes, patients who never left, their stories etched into the walls. She panned the camera upward, capturing the peeling paint, flaking like old skin, the overgrown ivy clawing at brick as if to pull it down. Silence pressed in, broken only by the distant drip of water, somewhere unseen, a metronome for forgotten routines. She stepped through the gate, boots crunching on gravel softened by mist. Here, the air carried a weight, not just moisture, but something heavier, an expectation. Mara shook it off, focusing on the shot, the fog-shrouded path leading to the entrance, the hilltop a blurred threshold where earth met ether. But as she advanced, a thought intruded, unbidden and sharp. Was this neutrality, filming the void without stepping into it? The legend she'd researched, Iris Calder's guarded emails hinting at deeper fractures, demanded more than optics. It whispered of complicity, of eyes that saw too little to truly witness. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the fog's insistent embrace, drawing her gaze inward. The asylum's silhouette sharpened in her mind's eye, not as backdrop, but as mirror. Detached chronicler, she reminded herself. Yet the silence gnawed, urging a question she couldn't quite silence. What if observing bound her closer than she dared admit? She raised the camera again, but her hand steadied slower now. Attention taut as the mist thickened, veiling the world in tentative invitation. As the light faded further, Mara made her way inside, where Iris awaited in the dim corridors. Iris led Mara down the dim corridor, her footsteps muffled by layers of dust that clung to the cracked linoleum like forgotten sighs. The air hung heavy, laced with the faint, metallic tang of old paper and rusting metal. They paused before a row of filing cabinets, their drawers warped and streaked with grime. Silent sentinels, guarding secrets that time had tried to bury. Iris's hand hesitated on the handle of one, her fingers tracing the edge as if testing its weight against her own restraint. The official records paint it straightforward, Iris said, her voice measured, a curator's recital honed by years of deflection. Blackwood Asylum closed in '78 after budget cuts and shifting policies. Therapeutic innovations gave way to pharmaceuticals, patients were relocated or released. No scandals, just the slow fade of an institution outliving its purpose. She pulled the drawer open with a reluctant scrape, the sound echoing like a withheld confession. Inside, folders slumped against each other, labels faded to illegible whispers. Mara leaned in, her notebook poised, eyes scanning the dim labels under the weak beam of her flashlight. She was here for the facts, the verifiable threads to weave into her documentary, proof that her channel could delve beyond cheap thrills. But something in Iris's tone snagged, a subtle fracture beneath the polish. Relocated, Mara echoed, pressing gently. And the ones who weren't? The records mention unaccounted transfers, but no names. What happened to them, really? Iris's gaze flicked away, toward the cabinet's shadowed depths, where dust motes danced in the intrusion of light. Jealousy flickered unbidden, a quiet resentment for those patients whose stories she'd archived but never voiced, their pains eclipsed by the town's collective amnesia. She shouldn't care. Survival demanded distance. Yet Mara's persistence stirred an old ache, the kind that blurred professional lines. Most were absorbed into state care, Iris replied, sliding a folder forward. It was thinner than the rest, its cover stamped with a redacted seal. But this one, patient 47, the file contradicts the closure reports. Experiments with echotherapy, they called it. Sound waves to realign fractured minds. Official line says it was abandoned early. This suggests otherwise. Mara's fingers brushed the paper, cool and brittle, as she flipped it open. Notes scrawled in hurried ink, sessions extending into the night, patients reporting, residual voices, long after lights out. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the dawning realization that detachment was a fragile shield. These weren't just entries. They pulsed with unspoken lives, demanding more than transcription. She glanced at Iris, whose eyes now held a tentative softening, the wary barrier thinning like fog under scrutiny. Iris watched her, weighing the risk. This outsider, with her camera and composure, might actually listen, not exploit, but hear the human echo beneath the bureaucracy. It's not just history, Iris murmured, almost to herself. It's what they couldn't say. The question lingered unspoken between them. Could Mara pierce the veil of official phrasing to touch the living memory it concealed? The cabinets loomed, their drawers half open now, as if exhaling the archive's guarded breath. With the initial interview behind her, Mara began her deeper explorations the next day. Mara Voss stepped into the therapy wing, her boots echoing softly against the cracked linoleum. Each footfall a deliberate anchor to the present. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp plaster and forgotten antiseptic, the kind that clings to the skin like an unwelcome memory. She adjusted her recorder, its red light blinking steadily. Her shield, her proof of detachment. Therapy wing. Day 2, she murmured into the mic. Voice clipped and professional. Examining residual artifacts. No anomalies yet. Her gloved fingers traced the dust-veiled intercom panel on the wall, its brass dial tarnished but intact. The echoing dial, as Iris had cryptically called it in her fragmented notes. Mara hesitated, rationalizing it as just another archival tool, a relic of mid-century electrotherapy sessions. Facts, she reminded herself. That's all this is. Data points in a larger narrative. She twisted the dial with a faint click, expecting static or silence. Instead, a low hum stirred, like breath caught in rusted pipes. Whispers unfurled, layered and indistinct. A doctor's measured tone intoning. Patient exhibits resistance to verbal cues. Proceed to auditory immersion. Overlapping, fainter. A patient's murmur, pleading. No, not pleading. Questioning. Why won't it stop? The voices in the walls. Mara's pulse quickened, but she leaned closer, notebook in hand, jotting timestamps. Detached, objective. The dial warmed under her palm, as if alive, drawing her in. The whispers sharpened, weaving into a chorus. Dr. Curvern's voice, authoritative yet frayed, confessing fragments. The boundaries blur, mind and machine, echo and essence. Then, softer, the silent patient's residue. A hush that wasn't empty, but pregnant, pressing against Mara's ears, like fingers on glass. She felt it then, a subtle tug at the edges of her composure. Not fear, but something warmer, insistent. The weight of their isolation seeping through the static, mirroring her own carefully walled solitude. She straightened, recorder still running, but her notes faltered. The voices didn't scream. They lingered, demanding acknowledgement, pulling her from observer to, what? Intruder? Confidant? Iris's warning echoed in her mind. Listen too long, and they listened back. Could the archivist be right? An ally in this fog. If Mara let the echoes guide her, the dial clicked again, unbidden, revealing coordinates etched beneath. A hidden archive in the East Ward. Mara released it, hand trembling slightly. The chill of the room now laced with an anxious warmth in her chest. Facts alone, were they enough to truly hear? The whispers faded, but their resonance hummed on, eroding the distance she'd so fiercely guarded. Guided by the dial's hint, Mara ventured into the archives later that afternoon. Mara's flashlight beam sliced through the archive's gloom, a thin scalpel probing the dust-shrouded shelves. The asylum's air hung heavy, laced with the faint, metallic tang of rust and regret. She had come for the official ledgers, neat rows of dates and diagnoses, the sanctioned skeleton of the place. But her fingers, gloved and methodical, brushed something softer. A slim, leather-bound volume, wedged behind a stack of faded requisitions. Iris Calder's diary. The archivist's name was etched faintly on the cover, like a confession half erased. She hesitated, the beam trembling slightly. This wasn't protocol. Diaries were personal, not evidentiary. Yet the weight of the town's silence pressed on her, the same hush that muffled the wards upstairs. Mara flipped it open, her breath steady, detached. Just another artifact. Objective data. The entry dated October 17th, 1958, unfolded in Iris's cramped script. They say the experiments ended with Dr. Curvern's breakthrough. Cures, they called them. Machines humming life back into broken minds. Lies. I was there, in the sub-basement, when the dial echoed, not with voices, but screams swallowed whole. I handed him the probes, my hands. To save my sister, they said. But she didn't speak after. None did. The guilt isn't in the records. It's in the quiet, after the hum dies. Mara's pulse quickened, a subtle fracture in her composure. The official narrative, Curvern's enlightened therapies, the asylum's noble decline, crumbled like the peeling plaster around her. This was no clinical footnote. It was flesh, raw and unfiltered. Iris, the reluctant guide with her guarded eyes, had carried this alone. Mara leaned against the shelf, the wood creaking like a withheld sigh. Her mind raced. How deep did the complicity run? Was Iris's aid a betrayal or survival? And she, Mara, what was her role here? Sifting these bones for a channel's thrill. As she turned the page, a thin strip slipped free. A faded patient bracelet, its plastic brittle, stamped with a number long since smudged. It coiled on the floor like a shed skin. Compelled, Mara picked it up, the cool band slipping over her wrist for a fleeting moment. Restraint. Not just fabric, but the echo of wrists chafed raw, minds pinned under humming lights. She felt it, not a jolt, but a seep, the weight of another's silence pressing into her own thoughts, blurring the line between observer and observed. She removed it quickly, but the sensation lingered, a quiet erosion of her distance. Empathy flickered, unbidden. Not pity, but recognition. Iris had trusted her enough to leave this here. A wordless bridge across the archive's void. Their wary exchanges, the archivist's averted gaze, now sharpened into alliance. Truth, unvarnished, demanded more than cataloging. It asked her to bear it without twisting it into spectacle. Mara closed the diary, the question coiling in her chest like fog. Could she hold this raw edge? Let it change her narration? Or would the pull toward drama claim it all? The archive whispered back, unanswered. The diary's entry mentioned a branch of the bracelet corridor, drawing Mara there next. The corridor stretched like a forgotten vein in the asylum's decaying body, its walls shedding flakes of paint in slow, silent surrender to the damp autumn air. Mara moved with the measured steps of an observer, her flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, capturing the peeling layers for her lens. She had come here to document, not to dwell. Each creak of the floorboards, each distant drip from unseen pipes, mere notes in her objective chronicle. Wariness kept her at arm's length. The town's whispers of this place as cursed ground were just local color, nothing more. Her boot nudged something metallic on the floor, a glint amid the dust. She knelt, the beam illuminating a scatter of faded patient bracelets, their plastic bands cracked and brittle, name tags long faded to illegible smears. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, strewn as if discarded in haste during some long-ago evacuation. One lay closest, its clasp dangling like a broken promise. Mara hesitated, her gloved fingers hovering. Protocol demanded distance, but curiosity, the documentarian's curse, pulled her closer. She lifted it, the weight negligible, yet it hummed against her palm, a faint vibration syncing with her pulse. The first intrusion was subtle, a chill threading up her arm, like fog seeping through a window crack. Not cold, exactly, but a sensation of restraint. Tight bands, cinching wrists that weren't hers. The rub of unyielding plastic against skin raw from futile struggles. A fragment of memory flickered. Not her own, but another's. A woman pacing this very hall. Words trapped in her throat. The world narrowing to the endless loop of locked doors and echoing footsteps. Mara's breath caught, her free hand pressing to her temple as a wave of dizziness bloomed, the corridor tilting like a poorly framed shot. She dropped the bracelet, but the echo lingered, burrowing deeper. Another one caught her eye, half buried under debris. She shouldn't, she knew, but the pull was insistent. A whisper, urging her to listen. As her fingers brushed it, the sensation sharpened. A surge of isolation, not just physical, but profound. The kind that hollows the chest. Faces blurred in her mind's eye. Nurses with clipboards, voices droning diagnoses like verdicts, a silence that screamed without sound. Empathy, uncoiled, unbidden, sudden and sharp, cracking the shell of her detachment. These weren't stories for clicks. They were lives, etched in the asylum's psychic residue, demanding more than observation. Iris's face surfaced in her thoughts, the archivist's guarded eyes, her reluctant tales of hidden archives. Mara had seen the weight in her posture, the unspoken scars mirroring these bracelets' ghosts. If Iris could carry that burden without shattering, perhaps Mara could too, bridging the gap through shared, silent witness. But as the dizziness ebbed, leaving a tremor in her limbs, the question hung in the stale air. Could she absorb this suffering, let it seep into her without twisting it into spectacle for the channel's hungry audience? The bracelets gleamed dully, waiting, as the corridor seemed to lean in, expectant. Deeper in the east ward, as the diary suggested. Mara uncovered more. Mara's flashlight beam sliced through the dust-choked air of the hidden archive, a buried vein in the asylum's rotting heart. Shelves sagged under forgotten ledgers, their spines cracked like old bones. Her fingers, gloved against the chill, traced the edge of a rusted metal box, its label faded to whispers, Curvern Sessions, restricted. She pried it open, revealing a tangle of reel-to-reel tapes, each a coiled serpent of the past. One tape caught her eye, marked with a single date from the asylum's final operational year. She slotted it into the ancient player she'd salvaged from a ward closet, the machine groaning to life with a hiss of static. The echoing dial, that intercom relic she'd pocketed earlier, its cracked face etched with phantom scratches, sat beside her like a sentinel. Idly, she twisted its knob, syncing it to amplify the tape's frail signal. The air thickened, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Dr. Elias Curvern's voice emerged, not the clipped authority of his public lectures, but a raw unraveling, laced with the scrape of pen on paper in the background. The boundaries, they blur, he murmured, his tone a scalpel dissecting his own certainties. We sought to anchor the fractured mind, to tether it to the machine's unyielding logic. Electrodes in the cortex, dials syncing neural fire to circuits. Patient 47, the silent one. She was the conduit. Her thoughts bled into the wires, and the wires, they whispered back. Sanity isn't a wall. It's a membrane. We pierced it, and now the echoes refuse to fade. Mara froze, the words landing like frost on her skin. Shock bloomed in her chest, a sharp intake that echoed the tape's hiss. Raw, unfiltered revelation. This wasn't the sanitized history she'd pieced from town records or Iris's guarded nods. This was confession. Minds fused to mechanisms. Patience reduced to feedback loops in a God-complex experiment. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. The archive's damp cold seeping deeper, mirroring the seepage Curvern described. She rewound a segment, the dial's faint crackle urging her on, voices from the ether brushing her fingertips. But as the shock ebbed, heavier thoughts coiled in its wake. How to frame this? Her channel thrived on the macabre, subscribers hungry for the asylum's ghosts as spectacle. Grainy footage, ominous narration. Yet this truth demanded more. Not a thrill, but a reckoning. Iris's warning echoed in her mind. The archivist's eyes shadowed with old grief. Some stories bind you if you shout them. Mara gripped the dial tighter, its surface warming unnaturally, as if the past pulsed through it, insistent. To broadcast this as horror porn would mock the silenced, turn anguish into clicks. But to bury it, that betrayed the very empathy she'd sworn to evade. The tape clicked to silence, leaving only the drip of water somewhere in the walls, a slow, rhythmic accusation. Mara stared at the player, her reflection fractured in the dial's glass. Could she wield this without fracturing herself? Without the weight of their stolen voices toppling her detachment? The question hung, unanswered, in the archive's breathless hush. As evening fell, a subtle presence emerged to guide her further. The silhouette flickered at the edge of Mara's vision, a pale smear against the asylum's peeling walls, leading her deeper into the east wing. The air grew thicker here, laced with the metallic tang of rust and neglect, each step echoing like a hesitant breath in the vast emptiness. Mara paused, her flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, catching the faint outline of the figure, a woman, or what remained of her, robes trailing like forgotten whispers. It wasn't fear that held her back. Not yet. It was the pull of caution, the observer's instinct to catalog rather than pursue. Iris's words echoed in her mind from their last fragmented call. Follow the signals, but don't let them own you. Trust in that guidance felt like a fragile anchor, strengthening as Mara pressed on, the silhouette gliding ahead without sound. The corridor narrowed, floors slick with seepage from above, and the dripping grew insistent, a slow percussion that mimicked a pulse. Mara's boots splashed faintly now, the cold seeping through her soles, numbing her toes as if the building itself were drawing her in. She felt it then, the shift, attention sharpening from wary detachment to something warmer, unwelcome. The silhouette halted before a rusted door, half ajar, revealing a flooded cell beyond. Water lapped at the threshold, shallow but insistent, reflecting the dim light in fractured pools that danced like trapped memories. Inside, the space was a ruin of submerged tiles, in shadowed corners, the water's surface unbroken save for ripples from unseen drips. Mara hesitated, heart steady but mind racing. Enter, and she crossed into the residue, no longer just witnessing. The silhouette dissolved into the murk, leaving only the echo of movement. Not a scream, but its absence, a silent pressure building in her chest, as if the cell held breaths too heavy to release. She stepped forward, the chill climbing her legs, and knelt at the water's edge. Her reflection stared back, distorted, eyes wide with a vulnerability she hadn't permitted before, ripples warping her face into something fractured, another's pain bleeding into her own. The echo intensified, a hum beneath the surface, unlicensed voices murmuring from submerged vents, piecing together confessions long buried. Mara's hand hovered, fingers brushing the water. The cold bit deep, stirring an ache not her own, a mute cry reverberating through her veins, demanding response. Empathy swelled, unbidden, cracking her resolve. Was this the boundary she could afford to breach? Feeling the weight of silence as her own, the water waited, reflective and unrelenting. Returning to the therapy wing the following morning, Mara confronted another layer. Mara's flashlight beam trembled across the therapy wing, casting elongated shadows that clung to the walls like forgotten therapies. The air hung thick, laced with the faint, metallic tang of rust and regret. She adjusted her recorder, voice steady at first, professional, a shield. Therapy room 3, cracked plaster, overturned chairs, mirror intact, but her words faltered as she stepped closer to the glass, its surface dulled by decades of dust and despair. She had come to catalog, to dissect the asylum's remnants without letting them touch her. Iris's warnings echoed faintly in her mind, not as pleas, but as a shared hush, inviting her deeper into the quiet that bound them. The mirror reflected her face, pale and composed, but as she leaned in, scrutinizing the frame for inscriptions, a whisper slithered from the vents. Not words exactly, fragments of breath, sighs layered like sediment. Rationality surged. Audio residue, perhaps from the old intercoms, or wind through the eaves. She pressed record again, possible acoustic anomaly, analyzing for patterns. But the whispers coiled tighter, pulling at the edges of her thoughts, unfamiliar aches blooming in her chest. Whose pain was this? Not hers. She was the observer, the one who framed horrors for the lens without fracture. Her fingers brushed the glass, cold as a fevered brow, and there, a hairline crack spiderwebbed from the center, invisible until now, as if the mirror had been waiting for her gaze. It split her reflection, one eye steady, the other widening into something raw, pleading. The whispers swelled, not louder, but nearer, A woman's silence, breaking into muffled sobs. The silent patient's echo? Or Iris's unspoken ledger of guilt? Mara's breath hitched. Her voice on the recorder cracked. A tremor she couldn't edit out. This is where they confronted the boundaries. But what if the boundary is me? The room seemed to tilt, her mind stretching thin across the divide, the crack widening in her vision. Empathy tugged, insidious as fog, blurring the line between noting the anguish and wearing it. Iris's diary, tucked in her pocket, felt heavier now. Not just evidence, but a call to listen together, to let the silence demand more than transcription. Could she hold her voice steady, or would this pull dissolve her into the glass, another fracture in the asylum's endless reflection? The whispers persisted, patient, insistent, as her hand lingered on the mirror's edge. That afternoon, Iris joined Mara in the archive for a deeper revelation. The fog clung to the asylum's arched windows, like a reluctant confession, muting the late afternoon light into a pallid haze. Mara Voss adjusted her recorder's microphone, its red light a solitary pulse in the dim archive room. Stacks of yellowed files loomed around them, guardians of silences long interred. Iris Calder, her hands trembling faintly, hesitated over a drawer in the rusted filing cabinet. "You think you're just passing through," Iris murmured, her voice a threadbare whisper. But this place, they called her silent because she wouldn't feed their machines with screams. But listen, the needle dropped, and a low hum filled the room, swelling into a voice so fragile it seemed exhaled from the walls themselves. Fragmented recollections of hydrotherapy tanks, the cold bite of electrodes, the endless drip of water mirroring unspoken dread. Mara shifted uncomfortably, her initial impulse to interrupt warring with an inexplicable pull. The sound wasn't sensational. No shrieks or frenzy, just a measured recounting, laced with pauses that hung like fog. "Why now?" Mara asked, her voice thinning. "You've guarded this place's secrets like a vault." Iris met her eyes, the archivist's reluctance fracturing. "Because you're not just observing anymore. That corridor you walked, the bracelets, they're leading you somewhere. This disc, it's the next thread. My aunt's memorial, if you'll hear it." The recording played on, evoking not horror's jolt, but a slow seep of shared isolation. The weight of minds bent but unbroken, silences that begged not for spectacle, but witness. As the needle lifted, Mara exhaled, her recorder forgotten in her lap. The skepticism ebbed, replaced by a tentative warmth, a joint yielding to the room's insistent quiet. She reached out, touching Iris's hand briefly. I need to record this. Not for the channel's thrill, but to carry it right." Their alliance solidified in that moment, a bridge over the abyss of detachment. The diary's clues now pointed to a new fork in the bracelet corridor, where more evidence awaited. But Mara felt the shift. No longer a voyeur, she bore the story's moral gravity, turning silence into a rite of quiet reverence. Yet, as they rose to leave, the question lingered in the air, unanswered. Could one honor such pain in stillness without twisting it into the very sensation it had fled? On her final day, Mara returned to the therapy wing to conclude her work. Mara stood in the asylum's therapy wing, the cracked mirror behind her, fracturing the dim light into shards of reluctant truth. Her camera hummed softly on its tripod, capturing the peeling walls where shadows clung like unspoken regrets. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and faded antiseptic, a reminder that silence here was never empty. She adjusted her notes, her hands steady, but her mind a storm. Should she splice in the raw echoes, the dial's crackling pleas, and turn this into the spectacle her channel craved? Or let it breathe as a warning, a quiet excavation of minds unmade? Her resolve hardened, a restrained fire in her chest. "No," she whispered to the lens, voice measured, like a confession to an unseen confessor. "This isn't for thrills." She reached for the echoing dial on the rusted intercom panel, its brass tarnished but insistent under her fingers. As she turned it, the familiar hum stirred. Not a scream, but a murmur, layered voices from the archives. Dr. Curvern's clipped regrets, weaving with the silent patient's voiceless pull. It guided her now, not as artifact, but as anchor, demanding she listen without exploiting. Iris lingered in the doorway, her silhouette a quiet ally after days of guarded truths. No words passed between them. A nod sufficed, affirming the bond forged in shared whispers. Mara leaned into the microphone, the camera's red light her sole audience. "The battles here weren't spectacles," she began, words deliberate, carving space in the fog. "They were fractures in the soul, mirrors we all carry. To sensationalize them would trap these echoes forever, senseless, unheard." The dial warmed in her grip, as if approving, its faint crackle fading into the drip of distant water. Doubt flickered. Could she release them without betrayal, without diluting their pain into her own narrative? She exhaled, the tension uncoiling into quiet acceptance, vulnerability settling like autumn mist. "Listen," she urged the lens, and thus the world beyond, not as voyeurs, but as witnesses. Let their silence speak and change us. The camera clicked off. Mara pocketed the dial, the asylum's weight lifting, not gone, but shared.